Welcome to the basement to the boardroom. How AI and energy transformation are redefining sustainable leadership. So my name is Mark Altsman. I'm the Regional Vice President for Johnson Controls for the Northeast. So today we're exploring a profound shift in how buildings and their assets are perceived and managed. What was once the responsibility of facility managers and engineers in the basement has now become a strategic focus in the boardroom. Why? Because the energy transition, evolving customer expectations, disruptive technologies like AI have elevated sustainability from a technical challenge to a core business priority. At Johnson Controls, we see this moment as a catalyst for innovation. Together with our partners, we're helping organizations turn energy challenges into opportunities for growth, resilience, and climate leadership. We're honored to be joined by a group of expert speakers. We're going to have 3 panels today, so it's going to be an exciting day. We're expert speakers and partners who bring deep insights into sustainability strategy, smart building technologies, energy transition, and corporate innovation. With a sharp focus on both operational realities and strategic imperatives, we'll unpack the challenges, the opportunities, the future outlook for building asset sustainability in the age of AI and energy transformation. Yesterday, in one of our events, we learned that Microsoft, in great partner, great space. We appreciate them allow us to have this event here and host it here. But what I learned yesterday about one of their initiatives was their code of conduct for their suppliers, right? And just like, what is your commitment to sustainability, to reducing your carbon footprint, and having some sort of a commitment just to do business with them. Love that, right? That's intentionality. So thank you, Microsoft, for being here. And so the stakes are high. According to a Forrester Global Survey, sustainability is a top 3 business priority with 1 out of 3, so 33% of businesses must accelerate to get to the 2030 goals, right? So we got 13% of retail and commercial real estate leaders say they have fully integrated building systems, but those who do are seeing dramatic results, right? So sometimes the technology in your buildings will help. So with urgency comes opportunity. Data centers, right? So for our data center clients, smart building solutions can reduce that non-IT energy consumption by over 50%. Enough energy savings power to 200,000 households if you get that 50% plateau. Those aren't future promises, they're today's reality. With a focus on both operational realities and strategic imperatives, we'll unpack the challenges, opportunities, and future outlook for building asset sustainability in the age of AI and energy transformation. So now, we're excited to explore these insights for the future sustainability leadership and how we can move from the basement to the boardroom together. All right, so the question is, as we truly moving the discussion from the basement to the boardroom, to help us answer that, we're honored to welcome 4 global sustainability leaders who are shaping the future of corporate responsibility and innovation. These sustainability powerhouses bring a wealth of experience and perspective from across industries. Their insights will help us understand how sustainability is evolving from operational concern to a strategic driver of business value. Moderating this spotlight panel is Sean Walters, who is a Senior Product Marketing Manager at Microsoft, where he leads the commercial narrative and thought leadership for sustainability. So Sean, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. As Mark shared, I'm Sean Waters. I lead our commercial sustainability narrative and thought leadership at Microsoft. And pretty excited today to be with a pretty incredible panel here. So I'll invite you all to join me up here, and we can go ahead and get started. Let's start off just with intros for everyone, and then we can get into the topic. So Melanie, I'll invite you to start with your intro.
I'm Melanie Nakagawa, Microsoft's Chief Sustainability Officer.
I'm Susan Adair-Kumar. I'm the Chief Energy and Sustainability Officer for Prologis.
Margaret Smith, not the Chief Sustainability Officer. We kind of split it between our go-to-market business and our internal business, and I kind of run the carbon footprint internally. So I also have a role meeting our sustainability goals.
I'm Katie McGinty. I'm Chief Sustainability Officer at Johnson Controls, and I also wear a very boring hat these days, Global Government Relations.
All right, so again, thank you all for being here. I know it's late in the week and it's been very active, so appreciate everyone's time and attention. So our conversation today is going to be very interesting. We're focusing on the growing importance of energy and efficiencies in the built environment. We'll cover how this topic has really shifted and giving sustainability much greater influence in the boardroom, and how these leaders are all seeing this take place in their own domain, in their own spaces. You'll hear how energy efficiency in the built environment is no longer just an operational activity, but it's really a key lever that can be leveraged for growth and business success. And we'll touch a bit about real estate and sustainability, and both retrofits and new builds, and how we're seeing energy management and AI really show up across all of this. So I'd love to start by just hearing from each of you, and let's kick off with some stories that you've seen and how the demand of energy management and sustainability are really changing the game in the built environment. And Katie, we'll start down there with you and your perspective from Johnson Controls.
Okay, well, I'll take the challenge of the basement and boardroom dialectic there, because I'm not quite sure we're beyond the second floor, maybe still hovering at the first floor. We might be out of the basement, however. And the backdrop for that is I thought it was a very interesting framing this week, speaking of government relations, where if we thought we had arrived that hands down everybody agrees that smart climate action is an invitation for economic success and growth, some of that might have been challenged this week. So, a tale of two very different perspectives, with one global leader thinking that climate action crashes the economy, and another doubling down and clearly having a different perspective. So, our challenge, I guess, is to lean in and put up and show up the data points that prove the point that maybe the second guy had the better of the argument. Here's how we see it going. I think for those of us who live in buildings and work in buildings, we think hands down, as it relates to buildings, the decisive case is that smart climate action is definitely a competitive advantage. And that story is evolving too, in three kinds of ways. First, most decidedly a story about cost advantage, right? Overhead, cut the overhead. Second, a story that increasingly isn't just about cutting costs, it's a growth story. And then third, it is a story that is most real and resonant in the most exciting and dynamic pieces of the global economy. So just a couple of those data points to put up and prove the case. In data centers, in critical environment, businesses and enterprises, and in advanced manufacturing. So, I think, and Melanie certainly is an expert, she'll go into some of these things, but when you see an industry where actually proper stewardship of resources is the key to accelerated growth, that's the story with data centers. Energy, water, space, and noise are the rate-determining steps for speed of growth. So, when we toss out a stat that says, hey, our advanced chiller cuts the energy need for cooling in that data center by 40%, that's a great story for the planet, for the bottom line. But it's a growth story, because that's 40% more electrons for compute. Or we've been really about the upstream embodied carbon. So when we reinvented the cooling widget and cut in the same machine the embodied carbon 44%, it cut the footprint of the machine 44%. That's 44% more data center space for racking. That's a growth story, and it comes from smart climate action. I see my friend Chris Lowe from Haleon over there. Definitely, he should be up here as a powerhouse of climate leadership. Chris runs sustainability for, as I said, Haleon, a major pharma company. And in critical environments like pharma, when we go in and talk to Chris and say, hey, we've got a great set of sensor suites and advanced building controls that, taken together, one, cut your energy bill 30%, but more, the temperature, pressure, and humidity controls that do that also detect and destroy particulates in the air, also detect and destroy the COVID virus in the air for a for hospital, pharma, chip fab, clean rooms, that critical environments. That's not just for the planet. That's for a growth opportunity. Mrs. Smith in that hospital is getting well faster with zero hospital-acquired infection. So I think the challenge is like to lift the stories out of that basement and have the boardroom here, whether you care a lick about the climate, leaning into these technologies unleashes definitely a slash in overhead, but also increasingly an opportunity for growth and for competitive distinction and differentiation.
That's great. Margaret, would you like to add anything?
Nice segue with the Mrs. Smith. So I'm feeling instantly like the handover was clear.
And you are looking very well, Mrs.
Thank you,
Smith.
thank you. I'm much better because of your systems. I'm going to take it in a slightly different direction to just the normal office environment. And when we look at the normal office environment, and we also look at, for Accenture, our core resource, which is our people, I go to it's making our people healthier, but it's also letting us run our offices more cost effectively and just more efficiently. So I take, for example, in Spain, we put in a ton of sensors in our new Madrid office. We're able to close down floors when utilization is low. We're able to ping people and say, did you know the carbon dioxide in your meeting room is too high? And I'll get a ping on my PC that says, have you booked in a conference room for 4 people? Are there more people in there than that? Because your carbon dioxide level is too high. Would you like us to send someone around to move you or change the airflow? Right? And that's happening now. We have that now in 20 flagship offices out of 600, but 20 is great, and it's our major cities. And it's changing also our relationship with our people, because if you take a company like Accenture with 800,000 people, or I think this morning was earning 779, that's what we said, so I don't want to overquote. When you take a company like ours, and the median age of our company makes somebody like me prehistoric, the reality is our young people care passionately about this. So our biggest resource and our biggest asset is our people, and they care. And when they get the pings, they're excited. Somebody's looking after me. When I can close down a floor and run an office more effectively, adding to our bottom line, but also providing a customer discussion, right? We have customers in our office every day, and so it's also creating a growth discussion on what they could be doing. For us, for example, we have no single-use plastics anywhere around the globe. Done, out. I know, it's wonderful. Isn't it really good? Can we just stop for a moment? Aren't we wonderful? Yeah. So we have no single-use plastics, and the conversations we get to have with our customers who are in the office, they don't notice it until you tell them to notice it, and then no, you really do have it. I'm like, that isn't single use. Please look. That's actually a reusable plastic, and it has a big sign. This is a reusable plastic, and there's a bin you put it in, right? So we take it really, really seriously. So I think the conversation on this is all the sexy stuff she's talking about and some of the real stuff that just day to day in the environment. Our CEO is now, hey, we got rid of single-use plastics. Why am I looking at a straw? It's changing the whole conversation, and that has been brilliant.
Thank you. And Susan?
Great. Well, it's good to be here. And I'm going to first start by explaining who is Prologis, because some of you may not know who we are. So Prologis is the world's largest logistics real estate company. We're in 20 countries, and we have 1.3 billion square feet. So I wanted to kind of set the context in terms of what we are doing in a real estate company. So I come from an energy background. I was with Schneider Electric for 17 years before joining Prologis. So you may ask, well, what are you doing from an energy background in a real estate company? I think, we really are facing a different future relative to energy. We are so used to just accessing it when you want to. The future is very different. So you really have to marry real estate, energy, and digitization to get to the efficiency and the future that you need. So at Prologis, we generate on-site solar energy. We have back-of-the-meter storage for resiliency of our customers. We have front-of-the-meter storage for the resiliency of the grid. We have charging infrastructure that helps to electrify the fleet of our customers. And the largest customer that we have, I won't name them who they are, but some representation is here. And they would tell you today that they no longer buy land, but they buy power. And we build data centers. So our ambition is to deploy 8 to 10 billion of capital in data center. So when you think of all of these aspects, there's a lot of conversation in our boardroom about energy. And we're very much thinking about how do you create the electrons? How do you manage and optimize the electrons? And as you look at the future, managing that demand is going to be very critical. So we are thinking about what would it mean to be a virtual power plant, for example, and all of this in order to make our portfolio super relevant for the future.
That's great. And Melanie?
Great. It's so fun following these three amazing stories. And I'm thinking, what do I add to the conversation? So, if we're thinking about just incredible, sort of inspiring success stories that come when you marry multiple streams together between technology, digitization, energy needs, and infrastructure, I think a data center is a great example about how this all comes together. So for a company like Microsoft, in 2020, we set a really bold target to be carbon negative. And that really drives how we think about, and water positive and zero waste. And I'll take two together, which is, I'll take all three, zero waste, water positive, and carbon. All three of those show up at a data center. And driven by that North Star, it has driven us to do a lot around innovation to make sure that we can be on track to reach those goals. And it requires the data, the digitization, the innovation all coming together. So what does that look like? Let's just take a look at the Wisconsin data center that we talked a lot more about last week. We gave people an internal look at it. It'll be the largest, most powerful AI data center in the world when it's completed next year. This is in the state of Wisconsin, and it has driven us to drive so many innovations across all three of those areas that show up there. So let me just give an example. On the energy front, we want to make sure that to be carbon negative, we want to make sure that we are bringing on as much clean power to all of the grids where we are showing up, and in that process, adding more power to those grids and ensuring as much of that can be carbon free as possible. So you look at the work that we're doing around power purchase agreements. We've grown that portfolio from just 1.8 gigawatts, which at the time was huge in 2020, and it's over now 34 gigawatts. It's an incredible growth in the need to power our assets with carbon-free sources into those grids. Another great example is around water. A lot of people are familiar with the existing footprint of water around data centers. And we know that as we continue to grow, we have to continue, to Katie's point, bring those efficiencies forward because those are dollar savings, those are cost savings. So how do you innovate? And it's been a really exciting time over the last probably 2 years when it comes to innovations in the water and energy use component, including from first you just blew fans in the air to cool these data centers. Then you went to more sophisticated things like HVAC systems. And then we moved from air-cooled, we went from evaporative cooling to air-cooled. So you go from just letting the water evaporate to cool it out, which uses a lot of water, to actually going into a closed-loop system and having it be a fully circular closed-loop system, which uses a far less water. And then there were two more innovations that happened because we're growing AI. Anyone who has a phone or a laptop, they get hot. And it's because the chips get hot. And so with AI chips, they certainly get hot. So we learned that we can actually come up with something called cold plate technology and bring the cooling at the chip level through, again, a closed loop liquid system, which requires no new water once the water's filled the tubes, which again reduces the water footprint within the data center. And then earlier this week, we announced a new innovation on cooling, which is not just at the chip level, but actually on the chip itself, creating these little micro channels to let the liquid cooling go onto the chip to cool it even faster. And that is actually going to show both an energy savings and a performance savings for the building and the data center, as well as a water savings. So we're just at this really interesting time of transformation that's happening, driven by innovation, driven by sustainability goals, driven by efficiency, and driven by dollar savings across energy, water. And then on waste, we're doing some really great work on trying to be more circular in our data centers, reusing, refurbishing, recycling our hard disk drives and the waste coming out of that so we can go towards a zero waste goal and reach a 90% reuse target for our cloud hardware. So it's really just exciting to see how all of these companies and players on this high top chairs are all using, the ambition of both, a country goal, a corporate goal, a boardroom goal, a boardroom commitment to drive incredible innovation throughout the infrastructure stack, whether it's a physical infrastructure or a data center infrastructure.
I think you did pretty darn good adding to the previous three stories.
I'd echo that. All really amazing stories. And I think we're starting to get the picture painting. And it also really highlights, I think, the complexities and challenges associated with energy management, even what you're sharing with the microfluidics announcement, which there's a blog post now out if anyone's interested in reading. But the device, it's the size of a hair, which just shows how small and detailed engineering work is required there. So I'd love to dig into a little bit more around the complexities and those challenges with that energy management. And Susan, I'd love to start with you and your perspective there.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the scale of what we have, in order to manage the energy, you have to have the data digitized. And I can't tell you how challenging that is when you've got 1.3 billion square feet. So the first thing that we had to do is to say, hey, everybody, you have to use the same systems. Just having data itself isn't good enough, but you have to be able to aggregate it. Second, you have to kind of predict the demand of the future, right? So I can't just optimize for what we have today. I have to really kind of put the path forward to what we need in the future. And that means that we have to tie the strategy of energy to the core of what we're doing at real estate. And that you have to tell the story of why, and you have to bring the people along with you in order to be able to do that. And that's been challenging.
Understandable. Margaret, how about you and your perspective on that one?
I think the interesting thing is the numbers, and I was listening to everybody who's presented, and if you just look at the basics of what AI is going to do by 2030, right? 612 terawatt hours of power, which is basically the size of the Canadian draw every year. 3 billion cubic meters, sorry, too many things on the end, which is basically the draw of Denmark or Sweden, right? I mean, those are shocking numbers. And what AI is going to contribute to the atmosphere is the same as shipping or air travel, right? So you're talking about a third major polluter industry. It's also the thing that's going to change the whole story in a positive way. And so a lot of the work we're doing, exactly what you were talking about, how do you bring the data together? How do you aggregate and optimize in a way? How do you get it to guide your next bit of the journey? And for us, it could be as simple as we drive everybody back and forth in India, right? If you're in India, I drive you home. We're doing route optimization, okay? So it's not sexy and it's not AI for data centers and all of that stuff. But route optimization is driving our numbers down. Now, if I can actually get electric cars with electric charging in India at scale, that's going to be a ginormous move. So we're doing it step by step by step, right? There aren't, truthfully, enough cars. There aren't enough charging points. We're helping build the infrastructure. But the combination of all those things is letting us have a really sizably different impact. And I loved what you were saying about the fact that all of these decisions are now being made in concert, right? There's no isolated decisions anymore. It's what's the impact on this? What's the impact on this? How do we join those together to come up with a more optimized, sustainable solution? And that's very much where AI is going to take us, even though the cost of AI to the atmosphere is massive. If we're building it in the right way, the output is going to be far beyond anything we've dreamed of.
Yeah, I think that's a great point in addressing kind of the duality in all sides of AI and how it, at Microsoft, we talk a lot about how it can be a game changer for advancing sustainability and really a game changer across the board for all of our initiatives. And so I'd love to kind of go into that a bit further. And Melanie, I'll invite you to share from Microsoft's perspective of how do you see AI really advancing the opportunity to achieve sustainability goals?
Great. I mean, what we get really excited about and interested in is unpacking the role of data centers in the economy, the energy consumption, the electricity consumption of it, and then the emissions associated, right? So if you look at the International Energy Agency, it talks about data centers' electricity consumption is about 1.5% of total electricity consumption today, and it'll grow to be about 3% in 2030 or so. And that's electricity. So the more we can actually decarbonize those grids, you can ensure that the emissions associated with electricity are decoupled, because you can have a lot more energy consumption, but at zero emissions. And that really is the objective when you have a carbon negative goal, when you want to work on bringing more carbon free energy to grids. That's how that happens. You can have data centers that consume more power, but actually don't create more emissions. And that's really important. And how do you do that? How do you decarbonize a grid? Interestingly, AI can help with that. And there are really interesting companies like Line Vision that has deployed a dynamic line rating system into a transmission line system where, you know, you've got one transmission line and it's carrying power, but it's not carrying power at full capacity. And it's incredibly complex to figure out how do you increase more weather, temperature, sag on lines, things like that. And so Line Vision's developed an algorithm that they can deploy onto that transmission line. They did it in the United Kingdom, and they found they could bring on 60% more power capacity onto that line, which was roughly around 600 megawatts of offshore wind. Now, we hear a lot about we need more transmission lines, and that is absolutely true. But we also need smarter transmission lines that can hold more capacity, and that is completely possible. There's, I think 2.6 terawatts of power, clean energy, sitting in the grid today that is not being transacted or used or called up because it doesn't have the capacity to do so on the transmission line. This is where solutions like this are really possible, and they exist. There's also other really great examples. I heard from another colleague that her company has deployed it and delivered like a 20% energy efficiency to the grid that they're operating in. There's ways you could do for predictive maintenance that save, you know, people driving trucks around looking at transmission lines to look at them, but you can use AI to do that faster and quicker and get repairs faster and prevent things like wildfires and other things. So it's an exciting moment where the application of AI by companies, by customers, by utilities is accelerating it. And that's just with existing power. There's a whole other area of AI for scientific discovery. It's interesting. AI has been around forever. We know this. And we've been using it. It just has different looks when you go to a GPT or, you know, a sort of this new generative AI space. So what you'll be able to see now is, you know, for all of us who went through the COVID pandemic, it is an example. The mRNA vaccine is just a classic example of having be able to, you know, innovate on a vaccine in record-breaking time. That was using AI for science. How do you then do that now for battery technologies, for fusion energy? The list goes on. Battery storage, long-duration battery storage. So we're seeing breakthroughs. We partner with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. They looked at 32 million material candidates for a battery. They narrowed it down to 8, prototyped a battery. This process would have taken years. It took 80 hours. So there are more and more companies and customers we talk to that are rapidly prototyping and bringing to life batteries, new types of basically, you know, liquid immersion cooling techniques that don't use any PFAS chemicals, which is really important in the European context. So these are areas between new types of power generation, transmission, that all can be accelerated. If you add it all up, there was an LSE paper that came out a couple weeks ago that showed up to 5 gigatons a year of energy savings that can be delivered if companies are using AI towards energy solutions. So that's that is what's out there. And I think this is why it's so important that we continue to move forward with this growth, but doing so where everybody's utilizing it and applying it to these types of solutions, because, you know, for the benefits and the energy improvements far exceed the costs that incur to actually deliver the products.
That's great. Those innovation stories are so inspiring. Katie, I saw lots of head nods down there. I'd love to hear from you
Absolutely, yeah. For a former chemist, I am geeking out up here. I'm loving these stories. So two things came to mind. One, I think building, Margaret, on your insight in terms of how AI is unlocking also the solution to climate change. And a specific example there. So, you know, when we come into a building and, you know, buildings get LEED certified and all of that, day one, it's absolutely perfect. That's the day the building gets commissioned and all of the equipment gets commissioned. Now think of it this way. The day that you clean your house, it looks really perfect. And then the dog comes in, and then the kids come home from school. And a building is the same way. The set points and controls are all perfect for a nanosecond, and then somebody's too hot, they change it. Somebody's too cold, they change it. The building vibrates, it gets changed. And so the perfectly operating building quickly becomes one that's not operating well at all. What AI enables is continuous commissioning. Instead of single point in time commissioning. Now, why do you need AI? Not only because it's continuing, it's every second of every day, but to give you a sense of it, you go from a mechanical control that maybe is looking at 4 or 5 critical set points. With our OpenBlue and AI-powered systems from the digital perspective, we are literally processing 1 million data points a minute. And so that's occupancy. Is there nobody in that room? But it also is things like, what's the price of electricity right now? And should I pre-cool the room and dial it down while the electricity price skyrockets? So it's with that AI, and I'll give you one specific as-applied example. So we are privileged to operate, not just to service, but to literally operate and maintain a major hospital in Canada. We've been doing it for 20 years. We think we're pretty good at what we do, and that hospital has won every efficiency award for years. However, once we brought in the opportunity for continuous commissioning, even on the highest rated hospital, that capability unlocked 32% additional energy reduction and operating cost savings. We're blind to it. Without the AI unlocking these treasure troves of data. The second and quick one I would just say is, we worry about data centers rightly. We worry about the energy drain. Data centers are creating energy every minute of every day. That cooling that we're talking about, when we think about climate change, we very often are thinking about electrical energy. Thermal energy is a big deal. And so while right now, I think we're thinking too narrowly of the heat that's generated by a data center as a problem to get rid of, it's a massive energy source to be put to work. And so with Microsoft and others, we now are coupling that machine that gets the cooling done at 40% less energy, but instead of trashing the heat, we're grabbing it and putting it to work in what's called an absorption chiller. That doesn't run on electricity, it runs on heat to cool the place. I was a chemistry major, not physics. Somebody else got to handle that one. But I can tell you it's true. So there's a massive energy resource that's being created as well. And I think we're only just beginning to tap into that.
Great. So we're coming up on time here. We have one more question, and would love to hear from each of you on this. So we've talked a lot about how energy has really influenced sustainability as a strategic level with your leadership teams. Can you share an example over the past year, how that's come to life, or where you see that moving as we look to the future and where we head forward? And we can just maybe go down the line. Melanie, you okay to start with that one?
Sure. So we're seeing this energy in particular. We established an innovation fund back in 2020. It's $1 billion climate innovation fund. And its goal is to invest in the technologies we're going to need to see commercial by the year 2030 to meet our commitments and our goals. And through that, we're seeing energy being a key component in many of the investments we're seeing show up through the innovation fund and the companies we've invested in and what they're doing to use that. So we're deploying it in new types of, we're looking at geothermal energy solutions that are there. We're looking at how do you help that how do you create, to Katie's point, How do you use that in new material discovery or new novel technologies for the built environment, like cement and steel? We have a steel company that is creating a 95% lower carbon steel based on the energy inputs it's using and the type of processing it's using. And then we recently announced that we are now going to procure that steel in our supply chain, as well as buy the the environmental attributes of it towards our own reductions. So it's been interesting to see how we've taken an innovation fund, use what's happening around energy, and look at where are ways we can invest in companies that are using new types of energy sources, that are delivering new types of energy sources, to invest in them first, and potentially in the future procure those energy solutions or those innovations afterwards, to really keep a positive flywheel going around that energy, including creating energy demand and supply and moving that forward. And we talk to our leadership team about that all the time. And another area I'd say that we're seeing within since it's basement to boardroom, our boardroom is really concerned and really interested in seeing what are we doing to make sure we can stay on track to reach this, incredible, ambitious target of being carbon negative. And one of the things we point to is it's going to take several wedges for us to get down there, and energy is a really important one. We got to make sure we're powering our data centers and our direct operations, which is with as much carbon-free energy as possible. And then we got to make sure that 97% of our footprint, which is actually our value chain, it's not the power to power our data centers or any of the buildings. It's all the embodied carbon and upstream carbon in our supply chain. How do we get those things to be lower carbon, running on clean energy? So that gets us down a path where we're talking about semiconductor chips and how do we work with our supply chain? He mentioned at the top, our supplier code of conduct. That's across the 97%. It's asking each of those players to help them decarbonize. And a lot of it starts with energy, from chips to fuel to building materials to the indirect procurement through our supplier code of conduct. We see it across all of those. So it's really integral to every leadership conversation we have because it's fundamental to how we're going to reach our goals.
When I joined Prologis 3.5 years ago, I didn't realize how much energy is going to dominate the conversations. Every Monday, we deploy a massive amount of capital because we build about 40 million square feet per year, and we retrofit about 3 times more than that. And those decisions are made with where is the access to power, where can we get clean power, and what are the things that we should think about in terms of continuity of operation. The other thing that we do is when you look at the emission that we have, about 99.8% comes from Scope 3, which is from our value chain, which we don't control. And when I kind of dive into that, 75% of that is coming from the emissions from the energy use of our customers. So solving for that is going to be super important for that, and therefore we spend a lot of capital to solve for it. The other thing that we look at is embodied carbon, to your point. So looking for scalable cement that is low carbon, scalable steel that's low carbon is also something that we're solving for. And today we don't have those solutions, but innovation is going to come into play. And when we look at energy generation, we very much look at what are the new technologies, linear generators, fuel cells. So unless you focus on new ways of doing business and innovation, you can't get to the answer of what you're looking for.
So for us, we don't really produce anything, right? So we're a little bit different. And so I think for us, it's about 3 things. One is very similar to Microsoft, actually working with Microsoft. We have a supplier code of conduct. And so all of our emissions, all of our buy goes through that code of conduct, and we don't just encourage, but mandate various carbon goals for the people who supply to us. Secondly, we rolled out, and I didn't think this was going to work, but it's lovely to be wrong on this one. We rolled out a travel tool about 2 years ago. So every traveler in Accenture, because of course what do consultants do? They travel, whereas most of our missions, back to travel, right? They can now see their individual emissions. And within the next year or two, because of AI, we're going to be able to do it at the seat level. We're going to be able to look at the plane, look at the class you're flying in. We've already put in policies to change our travel. So for example, in Europe, we have a planes to trains policy. If you're going under 2 or 3 hours, I have to tell you, I can't remember, you can't be on a plane. You have to be on a train, right? And we're we're driving forward because of the data we have, working with the airlines and the hotels to understand what is a bigger hotel room cost? What is this hotel room costing in carbon? Is that hotel green, right? Are they plastic free? What are they doing? So we're getting down to the individual level, and then we're communicating that to each individual employee. I can go look at exactly what my carbon footprint is because of my travel. The third and last, I think, is about governance. So we're putting in, we're divvied up into 19 market units, and each market unit now has a carbon target. And right now, that carbon target is about their travel. It's going to quickly be about their travel and their procurement. So all of their GP&S will be in there. And shortly thereafter, it's going to be about, and now we're adding real estate. And so the carbon footprint of the market unit, and it's taken a lot of work to do because a lot of people said, oh, well, just make it like one widget for every person. And if they have 50 people, they have 50 widgets. And I was like, we got to look at the complexity of the business. Like in the Middle East, everybody travels all the time. All the time, right? If you're based in the Middle East, you're spending your life on a plane. If you're in Chicago, you may never leave Chicago. If you're in London, you're really never going to leave London. And you're likely, if you are, you're on the train, right? So we're looking at the complexity and the unique prototype of each business to understand what the carbon target should be. We've been piloting for 2 years, partly because we don't want to get it wrong, because this is where the last bit falls into place. It is part of our compensation strategy. So we have something called shared success at the CEO level. There are 6 levers to shared success. One of the 6 is sustainability. So now you're talking about the market unit leads will have a carbon target that will tie to their compensation. So to me, because we don't have gazillions of space and we don't make chips, though we do buy a lot of your chips. For me, it's about something different. It's about empowering, encouraging the employees, and then getting our leaders not just bought in. I took all of this strategy through the 19 market unit leads. Usually when I do this, I get a lot of moaning and really another thing I have to worry about. I couldn't have had more enthusiastic meetings. These were 19 people that I threatened their compensation, and they were excited about it. So, and not even just the Europeans, the Americans were excited too. Bit weird, I know. But, you know, it's been a real powerhouse, and our CEO, and we've just spent time in the last week, because earnings, of course, was today, trying to work out what is our, did we get exceeds meets? Did we get exceeds high? Where are we in sustainability? It's just a great conversation that we're now having at that level, so.
I'm sure they were excited. But what I love about that story is also you're making it very tangible. You're making it very real to the person. And I think I'd pick up on that in 2 quick stories. One is what hasn't worked is being about selling the widget. Oh, well, here's OpenBlue we can sell you. Or, you know, here's a heat pump we can sell you. As compared to outcomes and what's the real world upside that's going to do something meaningful for someone. So the 2 stories real quick are just, one is a hospital, and this hospital has been a wonderful customer of ours for a long time. The hospital is surrounded by a university that it would like to see thrive and be able to do better because it would like to become a research as well as a clinical hospital. The university hasn't found very good ways to be able to do that. But when we went and we said our OpenBlue central utility plan, plus we'll upgrade your chillers, plus we'll put in heat pumps and we'll take that thermal energy, we'll put that to work for you. Yeah, it delivered a 69% reduction in their natural gas and almost $800,000 a year in operating savings. But the key thing they wanted to hear is, and by the way, you now will be a generator of hot water, cold water, and steam, and you can share that with the university, and the university then able to grow and thrive. So the other story, I was sitting here thinking, would I really say this? No, I'm gonna. So basement to boardroom to bedroom. Uh-oh. So we own a 1,300 square foot little tiny condo on the Jersey Shore. And it's a little piece of paradise for us. It has not been touched by a lick of paint since it was built 33 years ago. I have been dying to convince my dear husband, who is not here to defend himself, to upgrade that little piece of paradise. oh, hon, we can put a heat pump in. It'll be so cool. And he's a climate geek, too. But the idea of a renovation project, no. I finally got him. I got him because the HVAC system in our 1,300 square foot little condo creates a perfect, incredibly narrow galley kitchen. There's 5 people and 2 big dogs in the 1,300 square foot. When he missed the Super Bowl winning play of the Eagles because the kitchen was crammed and he couldn't get his hoagie, now I said, we can take the HVAC out of the kitchen, and since it's a heat pump, we only need 1 unit instead of 2, freeze up that closet, we knock it down, we don't have a galley kitchen anymore, and you will not miss the Super Bowl again. The apartment's being demolished as we speak.
Awesome. Love rounding out with the human connection there. Thank you all so much. This was amazing. You all are pretty inspiring leaders. I'm sure many of us in the room feel that way, myself included. And thanks for sharing your insights. Appreciate it. And thanks.